The air in Savannah does not just surround you, it holds you. It is a thick velvet humidity that smells of river water and blooming jasmine, a scent that feels like a memory you can almost touch. Above, the great live oaks stretch their limbs across the streets, draped in the silver-grey lace of Spanish moss that sways with a rhythmic, ghostly grace. It is a city designed for the slow of heart, where every footstep on the weathered cobblestones tells a story of survival and elegance. Here time seems to lose its sharp edges, dissolving into the green shadows of the squares. But what is it about this place that feels so timeless? Perhaps it is the way the light filters through the canopy, turning the world into a cathedral of emerald and gold. To understand the beauty of Savannah, we must first understand the mind of the man who dreamt it into existence. In 1733, General James Oglethorpe arrived on these shores with a vision that was as much about social reform as it was about architecture. He did not want a city of cramped alleys and crowded tenements. He wanted a garden. This was the birth of the Oglethorpe Plan, a revolutionary grid system that remains one of the most significant urban designs in North America. Imagine a city built as a series of interconnected wards, each centered around a public square. These squares were not mere decorative afterthoughts. They were the lungs of the community, communal living rooms where every citizen had access to air, light, and nature. There is a mathematical elegance to it that feels surprisingly modern, yet its origins were deeply practical. The squares were originally intended as training grounds for the militia and fire breaks to prevent the spread of the conflagrations that plagued colonial towns. But, as the centuries passed, the military utility faded, leaving behind a legacy of tranquility. Today, 22 of the original 24 squares remain, serving as emerald anchors in a sea of historic brick and stone. Walking through them feels like moving through a series of outdoor chambers, each with its own distinct personality. Some are quiet and contemplative, while others are grand and ceremonial, but all of them share that same Oglethorpe DNA. They remind us that a city can be more than just a collection of buildings. It can be a place that prioritizes the human spirit. The plan was also a social experiment. Oglethorpe envisioned a colony for the worthy poor, where slavery was initially banned and religious tolerance was the rule rather than the exception. Though the reality of history eventually drifted from these high ideals, the physical structure of the city still whispers of that original hope. As we step into the first square on our journey, we are stepping into a blueprint for a better world. But how did this rigid grid transform into the lush organic forest we see today? It began with the trees, the massive, sprawling live oaks that have become the city's silent guardians. They were planted to provide shade in the sweltering southern summers, but they grew into something much more profound. They became the architecture of the sky, turning the streets into tunnels of green light. Every square is a miniature ecosystem, a sanctuary where the city's pulse slows down to match the pace of the falling leaves. It is here, in the balance between the straight lines of the grid and the wild curves of the oaks, that the true character of Savannah is found. If the squares are the city's living rooms, then Forsyth Park is its grand ballroom. Spanning 30 acres at the southern edge of the historic district, this park is the crown jewel of Savannah's green spaces. It was created in the 1840s, a period when the Victorian era's love for public leisure was at its peak. As you walk onto the broad paved paths, The scale of the park immediately takes your breath away. It is a vast expanse of emerald lawn framed by the most spectacular canopy of live oaks in the entire city. These trees are giants, their massive, gnarled limbs reaching out like muscular arms to clasp hands over the walkways. The Spanish moss hangs so low here that you could almost reach out and touch the silver threads as they dance in the breeze. In the early morning, a low mist often clings to the grass, making the park feel like a scene from a dream or a faded 19th century photograph. You can hear the distant thud of a jogger's footsteps, the chattering of squirrels in the high branches, and the soft, rhythmic clicking of bicycle wheels. Forsyth Park is where Savannah comes to breathe. You see students from the local art college sketching under the trees, families spread out on blankets, and the occasional wedding party posing for photos in the golden light. There is a sense of communal peace here that is rare in modern cities. It feels as though the park has absorbed the collective calm of everyone who has walked its paths for the last 180 years. As you move deeper toward the center, the sound of falling water begins to grow. It is a cool, refreshing sound that cuts through the heat of the afternoon. This leads us toward the park's most iconic feature. But before we reach it, take a moment to look at the perimeter. The homes that line the park are masterpieces of Victorian and Second Empire architecture, with their towering windows and ornate balconies overlooking the greenery. They stand like silent observers of the seasons, watching the azaleas bloom in a riot of pink and white every spring, and the oaks stay stubbornly green through the mild winters. The park is a reminder that even as the city around it changes, the need for beauty and open space remains constant. It is a sanctuary not just for the body, but for the soul. The question is, what is it about this specific patch of earth that has captured the imagination of travellers for generations? The answer lies at the end of the path, where the white spray of the fountain meets the deep green of the forest. There it is, emerging from the tunnel of oaks like a vision of white lace, the Forsyth Park fountain. It is perhaps the most photographed spot in all of Georgia, and for good reason. Installed in 1858, this cast iron masterpiece was not actually a unique commission. Believe it or not, it was ordered from a catalogue, the Janes, Beebe and Company catalogue of ornamental ironwork. You can find its twins in places as far-flung as Cusco, Peru, and even in France, but somehow, in this setting, it feels as though it was made specifically for this soil. The design is classically Victorian, featuring ornate swans, tritons, and a crowning figure at the top, all glistening in a brilliant, clean white that contrasts sharply with the deep greens and greys of the surrounding forest. The water cascades in several tiers, creating a shimmering curtain that catches the sunlight and scatters it into 1,000 tiny diamonds. On a hot Savannah afternoon, the fine mist from the fountain drifts on the wind, offering a momentary icy kiss to anyone standing nearby. It is a place of rituals. Every St. Patrick's Day, the city dyes the water a vibrant emerald green, a nod to Savannah's deep Irish roots. But on a normal day, the water is clear and musical. People gather on the surrounding benches to read, to talk, or simply to stare at the hypnotic movement of the spray. There is something deeply soothing about the symmetry of the fountain. It provides a focal point of human order in the midst of the wild, sprawling growth of the oaks. It acts as a compass for the city, a place where people meet at the fountain as they have for generations. As you stand here, you can feel the history of the city vibrating in the ground. You think of the Victorian ladies in their heavy silk dresses strolling here, the soldiers who passed by during the Civil War, and the countless lovers who have whispered promises by its basin. The fountain is more than just plumbing and iron. It is a monument to the city's endurance. It has survived hurricanes, wars, and the slow march of time, yet it remains as elegant and cooling as the day it was first unveiled. But the park is only the beginning. To truly feel the pulse of Savannah, we must leave the wide open lawns and head north into the intimate shaded world of the residential squares. If you were to close your eyes and walk through Savannah, you could still tell exactly where you were by the scent of the air alone. In the springtime, the city undergoes a transformation that is almost overwhelming to the senses. This is when the azaleas bloom. They are everywhere, in the squares, in the private gardens, behind wrought iron fences, and lining the boulevards in massive billowing clouds of magenta, pale pink, and snowy white. The colours are so intense, they almost look artificial, a neon explosion against the muted grey of the Spanish moss. But it is the fragrance that truly defines the experience. There is the sweet, heavy perfume of star jasmine climbing up the brick walls, its tiny white blossoms releasing their scent as the sun goes down. Then there is the sweet olive, a plant that doesn't look like much, but possesses a scent that is almost impossible to describe. It is a mix of apricot peach and expensive soap, a clean and fruity aroma that drifts through the squares on the humid breeze. Later in the summer, the magnolias take over. Their flowers are huge, waxy and white, looking like porcelain bowls nestled among dark, glossy leaves. The scent of a magnolia is thick and lemony, a fragrance that feels like the very essence of the deep south. These smells are the sensory anchors of Savannah. They tie the memories of the city to the physical world in a way that sight alone cannot. For many residents, the first scent of sweet olive in the autumn is a signal that the brutal heat of summer is finally breaking, a moment of collective relief. For the visitor, these fragrances become a permanent part of their travel story. You might be thousands of miles away months later, and a whiff of jasmine will instantly transport you back to a shaded bench in Monterey Square. But why does nature seem so much more intense here than in other cities? It is partly the climate, of course. The long, wet summers and mild winters create a greenhouse effect that plants love. But it is also the way the city was designed. By weaving nature into every block, Oglethorpe ensured that the residents would never be more than a few steps away from a flower or a tree. This constant proximity to the living world creates a unique psychological state, a feeling of being in the landscape rather than just passing through it. As we continue our walk, the scent of sweet olive follows us, leading us toward the grand mansions that frame these fragrant gardens. We move now to Monterey Square, often cited as the most picturesque of all the city's plazas. Located on Bull Street, it was laid out in 1847 to commemorate the Battle of Monterey during the Mexican-American War. At its center stands a towering monument to General Casimir Pulaski, a Polish nobleman who died fighting for American independence. The monument is a soaring needle of stone, draped in carved marble garlands, but it is the surroundings that truly captivate the imagination. Monterey Square feels different from the others. It is deeper, darker, and more atmospheric. The trees here seem older, their branches more twisted, their moss more abundant. This square is the heart of what many call Southern Gothic Savannah. It is surrounded by some of the most stunning architecture in the city, ranging from the ornate Greek Revival to the dark, moody Gothic Revival. On one corner, you see the temple Mikvah's Rail, one of the few Gothic-style synagogues in the world, its pointed arches and stained glass adding an air of old-world mystery to the square. The light in Monterey Square is filtered through so many layers of leaves and moss that it takes on a greenish underwater quality. Even on the brightest day, there are deep pockets of shadow here. This is a place where you find yourself walking a little slower, speaking a little softer. There is a sense of weight to the air, a feeling that the walls of these houses have seen things they aren't quite ready to reveal. As the carriage wheels clatter on the nearby street, the sound echoes against the stone facades, creating a rhythmic pulse that feels like a heartbeat. You can almost see the ghosts of the past peering through the heavy velvet curtains of the upper windows. It is a square that rewards the patient observer. If you sit long enough, you start to notice the details, the intricate cast iron railings that look like frozen ivy, the hidden garden gates made of weathered wood, and the way the shadows of the oaks dance across the pavement like ink blots. This square was famously the setting for much of the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and it isn't hard to see why the author was so drawn to it. There is a drama here that is baked into the very soil. But what is the most famous house in this square? Just across the street stands a brick mansion that has become a symbol of Savannah's complex relationship with its own history. It is a house of beauty, of tragedy, and of enduring mystery. Standing prominently on the west side of Monterey Square is the Mercer-Williams House. Even if you haven't read the books or seen the movies, you would stop to stare at this building. It is a masterpiece of the Italianate style, built in the 1860s with red brick and ornate white window hoods that look like frozen lace. It was originally designed for General Hugh Weedon Mercer, but the Civil War interrupted its completion, and the general never actually lived there. For over a century, the house went through periods of decline and neglect until it was bought in the 1960s by Jim Williams. Williams was a legendary antique dealer and historic preservationist, a man who played a massive role in saving the very fabric of Savannah's historic district. He spent years meticulously restoring the house, filling it with museum-quality furniture and art. However, the house is famous for more than just its beauty. It became the centerpiece of one of the most famous murder trials in Georgia history, a story of high society, hidden lives, and a shooting that took place within these very walls. As you look up at the balcony, it is impossible not to feel a slight chill despite the southern heat. The house seems to hold its secrets tightly. But beyond the scandal, the Mercer-Williams House represents something vital about Savannah, the passion for preservation. In the mid-20th century, many of these grand homes were at risk of being torn down for parking lots or modern developments. It was individuals like Jim Williams and organisations like the historic Savannah Foundation who stepped in to say that these buildings were worth more than the land they stood on. They understood that the soul of Savannah was held in the brick and mortar of its antebellum mansions. Today, the house is a museum, allowing visitors to step inside and see the opulent world that Williams created. The interior is a symphony of marble, mahogany, and crystal, a testament to a bygone era of southern grandeur. But even as you admire the chandeliers, you are aware of the house's heavy atmosphere. It is a place where the past is not just remembered, it is felt. The house is surrounded by a high wall that hides a lush, secret garden, a common feature in Savannah architecture. These gardens are the private counterparts to the public squares, hidden sanctuaries where the scent of jasmine is trapped by the brick walls. And yet, the beauty of the house is inextricably linked to its darker history. This is the essence of the Savannah experience, the constant dance between the light of the garden and the shadow of the house. As we leave Monterey Square, we carry a piece of that shadow with us, moving toward a square that celebrates a very different kind of history. Walking a few blocks north brings us to Madison Square, a space that feels more open and heroic than the moody Monterey. Laid out in 1839 and named for President James Madison, this square is dominated by a grand bronze statue of Sergeant William Jasper. Jasper was a hero of the Revolutionary War, and the monument depicts him in a dramatic pose, holding a flag aloft even as he is mortally wounded. It is a stirring piece of sculpture that anchors the square in a sense of sacrifice and patriotism. But look away from the bronze for a moment and look at the buildings. Madison Square is an architectural textbook. On one side you have the green Meldrum House, a stunning example of Gothic revival architecture with its cast iron crenellations that look like the top of a medieval castle. This house has its own place in history. It was used as the headquarters for General Sherman during the final stages of his march to the sea in the Civil War. It was from this very house that Sherman sent his famous telegram to President Lincoln, offering him the city of Savannah as a Christmas gift. Across the square sits the Sorrel-Weed House, another architectural giant, known for its Greek revival symmetry and its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the city. The square acts as a neutral ground between these titans of history. Under the shade of the oaks, the grass is perfectly manicured, and the benches are often filled with students from the Savannah College of Art and Design, their sketchbooks open as they try to capture the play of light on the Gothic arches. There is a sense of continuity here. You realise that while the soldiers and the generals are gone, the spaces they inhabited remain, preserved by a city that refuses to forget its past. The air in Madison Square feels lighter. The sun hits the grass in broad, warm patches, and the sound of the city is a bit more present here. It is a place of transition, where the residential quiet begins to meet the commercial energy of the downtown. But, even in this sunlit square, there are reminders of the struggle that built this city. The stones under your feet have been worn smooth by millions of steps, each one a part of the long, unfolding story of Savannah. As we continue, we move toward a square that became famous to the entire world through the magic of the silver screen. For many people, their first image of Savannah didn't come from a history book, but from a movie screen. We are now in Chippewa Square, the place where a man named Forrest Gump sat on a bench and told the story of his life to anyone who would listen, while the actual bench used in the film was a prop, and now resides in a museum. The spot where it sat remains a pilgrimage site for fans from all over the world. There is something poetic about that. A fictional character becoming a part of the city's real-world geography. But Chippewa Square has much older stories to tell. At its centre stands a magnificent bronze statue of the city's founder, James Oglethorpe. He looks out toward the south, his sword at his side, forever watching over the colony he established. It is a powerful contrast, the 18th century general and the 20th century fictional hero, both sharing the same patch of ground. The square itself is a hub of activity. It is surrounded by the historic Savannah Theatre, one of the oldest continually operating theatres in the country, and the Grand First Baptist Church. The oaks here are particularly majestic, their limbs creating a high vaulted ceiling that makes the square feel like a natural cathedral. You can almost hear the echoes of the "Life is like a box of chocolates" monologue drifting on the breeze. But it is soon replaced by the real sounds of the city. the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages and the distant tolling of church bells. Chippewa Square represents the intersection of Savannah's past and its place in the modern imagination. It is a reminder that cities are living things, constantly adding new layers of meaning to their historic foundations. People come here for the movie connection, but they stay for the atmosphere. They find themselves sitting on the other benches, watching the squirrels dart among the roots of the oaks, and realizing that the slow pace of forest storytelling is actually the natural pace of the city itself. It is a place that invites you to stop, to sit, and to reflect on the long journey that brought you here. But our journey is far from over. From the cinematic charm of Chippewa, we head toward the river, where the city's history takes on a more industrial, weathered tone. As we move into Lafayette Square, the skyline of the city changes. Rising above the rooftops are the twin spires of the Cathedral Basilica of St. John the Baptist. It is a breathtaking sight, a piece of old Europe transported to the Georgia coast. The cathedral's white steeples topped with gold crosses pierce the blue southern sky, providing a vertical counterpoint to the horizontal spread of the live oaks. The square itself is named for the Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the American Revolution, and it retains a certain Gallic elegance. At its centre is a beautiful tiered fountain, a gift from the colonial dames of America, which gurgles softly in the shade. But the real draw here is the atmosphere of quiet reverence. Just a few steps away is the childhood home of the great Southern writer Flannery O'Connor. It is easy to imagine her as a young girl, walking through this square on her way to Mass, absorbing the Gothic imagery and the complex moral landscape of the South that would later fill her stories. The cathedral itself is a marvel of the French Gothic style. If you step inside, the transition is startling. You move from the humid, sun-drenched square into a cool, dim interior lit by the kaleidoscopic glow of massive stained glass windows. The smell of incense and old wood replaces the scent of jasmine. It is a reminder of the diverse cultural threads that make up Savannah, the English planning, the Irish labour, and the French and Spanish religious influences. Back out in the square, the light plays differently. The white walls of the surrounding houses reflect the sun, making the greenery of the square seem even more vivid. This is one of the more residential squares, and you can see the daily life of the city unfolding. Residents walking their dogs, mail carriers navigating the steep stairs of the historic townhomes, and the occasional artist with an easel set up to capture the cathedral's spires. There is a sense of lived-in history here. It isn't a museum, it's a neighbourhood. The question is, how does a city maintain such a delicate balance between being a world-class tourist destination and a quiet home for its people? The answer is found in the squares themselves. They act as buffers, as communal spaces that belong to everyone and no one at the same time. They are the heart of the Savannah identity. But as we head toward the river, the elegance of the squares gives way to a different kind of beauty, one made of iron, ballast stone, and the echoes of trade. Leaving the lush greenery of the squares behind, we head toward the Savannah River, where the geography of the city takes a dramatic turn. This is Factor's Walk. To understand this area, you have to realize that Savannah is built on a bluff high above the river. To bridge the gap between the warehouses on the water and the counting houses on top of the cliff, a unique system of iron bridges and cobblestone ramps was created. Walking along Factor's Walk feels like entering a different dimension. You are suspended between the upper city and the lower riverfront, walking on narrow iron walkways that span the deep, stone-lined chasms below. These chasms are home to the back entrances of the massive cotton warehouses, built of ballast stone, rocks that were used to weigh down ships coming from Europe, and then discarded here to make room for Georgia cotton. The walls are covered in moss and ferns, dripping with moisture and history. This was the commercial heart of the 19th century South. The factors were the men who graded the cotton and determined its price, and their word was law. You can almost hear the phantom sounds of the era, the shouting of traders, the heavy thud of cotton bales being moved, and the constant rattle of wagons on the stones. The architecture here is rugged and functional, a stark contrast to the delicate lace of the residential district. The ironwork of the bridges is sturdy and weathered, showing the patina of nearly 2 centuries of river air. There is something deeply atmospheric about this place, especially in the late afternoon when the sun cast long, dramatic shadows into the alleys. It feels like a setting from a Dickens novel, but with a distinctly southern humidity. As you look down from the bridges, you see the steep, narrow ramps known as Klusky embankments, with their mysterious vaulted chambers built into the stone. Some say these were used for storage, while others whisper darker legends of the city's past. Factor's Walk is a reminder that Savannah was not just a city of beautiful gardens, it was a powerhouse of global trade. The wealth that built the mansions we admired earlier was generated right here, in the dust and heat of the cotton exchange. But what lies at the bottom of these ramps? As we descend the weathered stairs, the smell of the river grows stronger, and the sound of the city changes from the clip-clop of horses to the deep, resonant hum of massive container ships. We are heading toward River Street, where the past and the present meet at the water's edge. We have reached the water. River Street is a mile-long stretch of history, commerce, and sensory overload. The first thing you notice is the ground. These aren't just any cobblestones. They are the original ballast stones from ships that crossed the Atlantic hundreds of years ago. They are uneven, slick with humidity, and notoriously difficult to walk on, but they are the literal foundation of the city's history. To walk on River Street is to feel the vibration of the river itself. On one side you have the massive brick facades of the former warehouses, now converted into shops, bars and hotels. On the other side, the Savannah River flows wide and deep, a murky, powerful current that carries the lifeblood of the city out to the Atlantic. The air here is a thick cocktail of scents. There is the salty, muddy tang of the river, the diesel of the tugboats, and then a sudden, overwhelming wave of sweetness. That is the smell of pralines. Savannah is famous for these southern treats, and as you pass the candy shops, you can smell the brown sugar, butter, and pecans being cooked in large copper kettles. It is a scent that draws you in, a warm and comforting aroma that cuts through the industrial edges of the waterfront. The sounds of River Street are a constant symphony. You hear the calliope music from the red and white riverboats, the laughter of tourists, and every so often a sound that stops everyone in their tracks. The earth-shaking blast of a container ship's horn. These ships are modern marvels, towering several stories above the buildings of the street as they are guided toward the port of Savannah. Seeing a vessel the size of a skyscraper glide silently past a 19th century warehouse is one of the great spectacles of the city. It reminds you that Savannah is still a vital part of the world's economy. But, even with the noise and the crowds, there are moments of quiet to be found. If you walk toward the eastern end of the street, the shops thin out and the path becomes more peaceful. Here, you can sit on the heavy wooden pilings and watch the water move. You think about the history of this river, the explorers who sailed up it, the enslaved people who were brought across it, and the soldiers who defended it. The river is the reason Savannah exists, and it remains its most powerful presence. As the sun begins to dip lower, the water turns from brown to a shimmering liquid gold. But before the day ends, we must visit one more place. A place where the line between this world and the next seems dangerously thin. As the shadows lengthen, Savannah reveals its other identity. It is often called the most haunted city in America, and standing in the deepening twilight, it isn't hard to believe. There is a weight to the history here that seems to linger in the air long after the sun goes down. Is it the moss swaying like restless spirits, or the fact that the city is literally built upon its dead? Because of the numerous yellow fever epidemics and the bloody battles fought on this soil, there are unmarked graves scattered throughout the historic district, sometimes right beneath the very streets we walk on. Take, for instance, the old pink house. This beautiful 18th century mansion, now a celebrated restaurant, is said to be home to the ghost of its original owner, James Habersham Jr. Diners often report seeing a gentleman in colonial attire, tidying up the tables or staring into the fireplace. Then there is the Pirate's House, a tavern that dates back to 1753. It was a place where sailors were famously shanghaied, drugged and dragged through underground tunnels to be forced into service on ships. The atmosphere in these places is thick with the past. But why is Savannah so obsessed with its ghosts? Perhaps it is a way of honouring the complexity of its history. In the South, the past is never truly gone. It is a ghost that walks beside you. The stories of spirits and hauntings are a way of acknowledging the tragedies and the lives that were cut short in the making of this city. As you walk through the squares at night, the flickering gas lamps cast long, distorted shadows against the brick walls. The wind through the oaks sounds like a whisper, and every creak of a shutter feels like an answer. Even if you don't believe in the supernatural, there is an undeniable energy to the city after dark. It is a feeling of being watched, not with malice, but with a quiet, persistent curiosity from the generations that came before. The question is, where does the story of the city truly end? To find the answer, we must go to a place where the living and the dead have reached a final, beautiful agreement. We must go to Bonaventure. A short drive from the city centre lies Bonaventure Cemetery. If the squares of Savannah are its living rooms, then Bonaventure is its eternal garden. Originally a private plantation, it became a public cemetery in the mid-19th century, and it is perhaps the most beautiful city of the dead in the world. As you pass through the gates, the world of the living seems to fall away. You are greeted by an avenue of live oaks, so dense and so draped in Spanish moss that the light barely reaches the ground. It is a place of profound silence, broken only by the call of a cardinal or the rustle of the wind in the resurrection ferns. The Victorian approach to death was one of romanticism and beauty, and that is on full display here. The monuments are not just stones, they are works of art. You see weeping angels with wings of stained marble, lifelike statues of children holding flowers, and elaborate family vaults that look like miniature Greek temples. But the true artist at Bonaventure is nature. Over the decades, the trees and the stone have become one. Roots wrap around headstones like protective hands, and the grey moss hangs over the statues like funeral veils. There is a sense of peace here that is different from the parks in the city. It is a finality that has been softened by the beauty of the landscape. One of the most famous inhabitants is the poet Conrad Aiken, whose bench-shaped tombstone invites you to sit and have a drink with him. And of course there is the memory of the bird girl statue, which once stood here and became the iconic cover of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Though the statue has been moved to a museum for protection, her spirit still seems to haunt these paths. Walking through Bonaventure is a lesson in the passage of time. You see the graves of Confederate soldiers next to those of modern families, all of them eventually claimed by the same moss and the same river air. The cemetery sits on a bluff overlooking the Wilmington River, and the view of the water through the trees is one of the most serene sights in the South. The river flows past, indifferent to the lives remembered on the shore, a constant reminder of the cycle of life and death. You find yourself reflecting on your own place in that cycle, in the presence of such ancient trees and such quiet stone. The worries of the modern world seem to shrink. You realize that memory is the only thing we truly leave behind, and in a place like this, memory is kept alive by the very earth itself. But, as the sun begins to set over the marshes, we must return to the city of the living for one final look at the Savannah we have come to know. The day is ending where it began, by the water. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the sky over the Savannah River turns a deep, bruised purple, streaked with veins of orange and pink. The city undergoes one last transformation. The gas lamps in the squares flicker to life, their warm amber glow cutting through the gathering blue of the twilight. The silhouettes of the oaks become sharper, more dramatic against the fading light. This is the hour when Savannah is at its most magical. The heat of the day has finally lifted, replaced by a cool breeze that smells of the salt marshes and the coming night. You can hear the distant music from the bars on River Street, the soft murmur of people heading out to dinner, and the rhythmic tolling of the bells from the Cathedral. It is a city that knows how to embrace the evening. There is a sense of belonging that settles over you, even if you are only a visitor. You have walked the grid, sat in the squares, and breathed the heavy air of the riverfront. You have seen the beauty in the shadows, the history and the ghosts. Savannah is a city that doesn't just show you its sights, it invites you into its story. It asks you to slow down, to notice the texture of a brick wall, or the way the moss catches the light. It reminds us that there is value in preservation, in nature, and in the slow, unfolding rhythm of a walk through a garden. As the last of the light disappears, the river becomes a dark mirror, reflecting the lights of the city and the stars above. The container ships continue their silent march toward the sea, and the oaks continue their centuries-long vigil over the squares. You realize that Savannah will be here, draped in its emerald moss and its long memories long after we are gone. It is a place that endures. And as you take one last look at the flickering lamps of the bluff, you know that a part of you will always remain here, in the quiet shade of the squares. The question is, when will you return? For now we leave the city to its dreams, tucked safely between the river and the forest. Thank you for walking with me through the emerald squares of Savannah. I hope you felt the humidity, smelled the jasmine, and heard the echoes of the past as clearly as I did. This city is a rare treasure, a place where nature and history have found a way to live in perfect moss-draped harmony. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to Daydreaming Travel Stories for more slow, immersive explorations of the world's most beautiful places. I would love to hear from you. What is your dream travel destination? Or perhaps you have a favourite square in Savannah that we didn't get to visit today. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep exploring.